Hi. Could
Hi.
we just get a sense of who's in the room?
Names? No.
Yeah, specific names. Like product versus engineering, and product versus commercial. How many product-y, engineering-y types? Yeah, that's right. We're in CSG, aren't we? Okay, so, and then commercial, yeah, almost everybody. Got it. And then in terms of sort of familiarity, how many have done search inside yourself? Oh, actually quite a few. Brilliant. And Headspace or GPause or any of that, you're right. What is that, about half? Something like that? All right, so that's, look, as Sasha said, we're keen, very happy to make this as interactive as you guys like. What we thought we might do is I can talk a little bit about why resilience is important. I'll do the nerdy bit, why resilience is important. She'll then do the really funny bit, all the magic, about how you actually build resilience and avoid becoming frazzled. And then what we'd actually love to do is sort of bring it together in Q&A afterwards, to the extent that you guys are sort of interested, is sort of how can we work with Google, harnessing your tech, either hardware or software, to solve mental well-being in a way, not just for Googlers, but for everyone. And in a way to do, can we do for mental well-being what DeepMind and with their NHS partnership is doing for physical well-being? We think that would be a fun thing to explore with you guys if you're up for it. Does that make sense? About right? So if I start with why resilience is important. So what I do as an angel investor and now as an investor with Vitruvian, a big growth equity investment fund, is we help entrepreneurs, we embolden entrepreneurs to understand the risks that they are taking, and then to help them build the resilience in order to deal with taking those risks. And just sort of winding it back, I think it's always helpful at these things to sort of frame this and really understand what we're talking about. So whether you're at Google as an innovator or a disruptor within a big company, or you're an entrepreneur like a Citymapper founder, your job is to take risks. And I always think it's really helpful to sort of unpick that a little bit and understand what risks you're taking, and then why resilience is important. So, in terms of the risks that people in this room are probably taking, we often start with product risk, and actually Google, I think as a company generally, most people at Google take quite a bit of product risk. In other words, you're bringing new products to the world, and the way you measure that is product market fit and traction. It's not always the way. There are other groups, other entrepreneurs who prefer not to take product risk, so they'll take a fairly familiar product, but they will take market risks. So they'll take a familiar product, but then they will build it in an unfamiliar market. So just as legitimate as a strategy, but a very, very different sort of set of risks. Whether you're taking product risk or market risk, you definitely also take execution risk, so getting stuff done. And in my world, in the investment world, we never back ideas, we back teams. We back people who get stuff done, which is a sort of a common misconception fueled by Dragon's Den and others. So that's what we do. And I think it's really important to sort of start there and ground it in. This is all about people who take risks. As I said, whether those people are entrepreneurs in a startup or whether they're innovators, disruptors within a big company like Google. And then just sort of pause there for a second and reflect on that, because I think, most of us in the real world spend most of our time trying to, eliminate risk, or at least mitigate it and box it in. And yet we're now talking about disruptors and innovators within a big company or startup entrepreneurs who deliberately invite more risk into their lives, which is, a fairly bonkers thing to do if you think about it. And in my experience, it very rarely ends up being contained at just professional risk, risk that I take during work. It very often, especially for the startup entrepreneurs, ends up being risk that sort of, in a porous way, filters into their real life. So risk to their health, risk to their relationships, risk to their house, their mortgage. So, again, we start from a fairly curious place. These are people who deliberately invite risk into their lives. So here's the bit about resilience. And if, I've often asked, what is it that I look for when I make an angel investment or any kind of investment? And it is always, if I had to pick one characteristic that I always look for in the entrepreneurs that I back, it would be resilience. And so what do I mean by that? There are two ways of thinking about resilience in my book. One is around protecting the downside of entrepreneurship or innovation, and another is kind of unlocking the upside. So starting with the protecting the downside, I think resilience for me is the ability to manage stress and anxiety. You will be told, as an innovator in a big company or an entrepreneur, you'll be told no 1,000 times. That's a stupid idea, get out of my office, that can't be done. So how do you pick yourself up from that? It tends to be a fairly anxiety inducing environment. So how do you manage your own stress and anxiety within a situation like that? The second aspect of it is the ability to make decisions in highly ambiguous, highly uncertain, highly volatile situations. That's what all of you do when you're being innovative in a big company. It's what entrepreneurs do when they're being innovative in a startup context. So that's the kind of the protecting the downside bit. Those are the characteristics of resilience that we look for. And then in terms of unlocking the upside, let me ask a question. Who can tell me the opposite of fragile? What's the opposite of fragile? Any words or phrases spring to mind? Sorry? Robust. It's a great one. So, sorry, there was another one there? Strong, yeah. And those are all good, and that's exactly where I started when asked exactly the same question. And so in a way, though, robust and strong, if fragile falls over when risk or volatility or uncertainty comes along, strong and robust just means can withstand uncertainty, volatility, risk. And Nassim Taleb, who wrote The Black Swan, which I think is an amazing book, wrote another book called Anti-Fragile, because he said there isn't a word for the opposite of fragile. In the sense that what is it, and he describes innovators and entrepreneurs in this way, what is it that not just can withstand risk, volatility, uncertainty, but positively blossoms and flourishes with more risk? And again, that's a pretty unusual concept. And he said entrepreneurs, innovators, are such people. And the way he describes it, and I think it's really, really powerful, very, very interesting, is innovators, entrepreneurs, they open themselves up to risk and uncertainty because risk is information rich. It's rich in information about your competitors, about your customers, about your investors. So if you open yourself up to it, yes, it's scary, but actually it means that you're nimble, you're on your feet. You're getting all the information about the marketplace. So, risk is information rich. I think is an incredibly powerful insight. And for me, it helps explain why entrepreneurs do what they do, innovators do what they do. They open themselves up to risk. So that's how I often think about resilience. That's what I look for in the entrepreneurs that I back. So it's relatively easy to describe what resilience is. There's a neuroscience definition of it actually around neuroplasticity. She knows, she'll tell you what that means. And so I hope that's a kind of it helps frame it in terms of, why resilience is important. And now Ruby's going to talk about how to actually build resilience.
Well, I think 1 in a million, or maybe those aren't the statistics, would get pleasure out of not being sure. Because the human condition that's terrifying. Yeah. Unless you have Asperger's and you don't have to concentrate on emotions. I'm not saying those are the lucky ones, but those seem to be the ones that evolution has thrown up to succeed the 21st century. Yeah. So sorry, anybody who has Asperger's, but you probably don't know you do. Is this starting off
This
badly?
is perfect. Yeah,
Okay.
great. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So if risk was natural, then we would be able to be in that state. But as humans, we have a lot of glitches. I know we think we're homo perfectus, but we aren't. So if I explain a little bit about, to me, what not the enemy is, but where we are so far and might stand in your way for being brave enough, I suppose, to believe in your own ideas and follow them through. So the reason I call the book Frazzled is because we all need stress. Let's get that out of the way. Otherwise, we'd still be sitting on our porch in Alabama playing the banjo. But the stress is, that's fine, and I'll explain why. Otherwise, you wouldn't have the oomph. But the frazzled bit is when we start to think about stress, when we start to get into these loop tapes of, oh my God, I shouldn't be stressed. We get caught in those stories. And there never is an answer, by the way, like, why aren't I thinner? No answer. Even Einstein couldn't answer that. But getting caught in those loop tapes is what keeps you up all night and what gives you that red mist, so all creativity shuts down immediately. Want me to explain a little bit about the history of why we're kind of fucked now? Would you like that? Okay, you might know this, but stress we needed. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting here. You know, first of all, hundreds of thousands of years ago, we were stressed, but we weren't frazzled because we didn't have language, right? So you couldn't give yourself those bad reviews like, you know that cave painting you did yesterday? Well, it sucked. So we couldn't do it. But back then when we were in the bush, you know, hunters and gatherers, and my people, the pointers, the Jews, we just pointed, and we became early shoppers. But we were perfectly fine, adjusted to the environment. But then when a predator came along, please tell me if you know this, we weren't in charge, but to save ourselves from extinction, this part in our brain called the amygdala would sound an alarm and it would shoot out this cortisol and adrenaline. And that's our fight and flight, by the way. We always use these words, but you don't think that there's actually a correspondence in your brain. You know, when you learn piano, it's not just because your fingers learned, something develops in your brain to give you that skill. So fight and flight is the gushing of cortisol. Then if we survived, it would immediately go down again, and we'd go back to hunting and back to the day job. Just like when you see an Attenborough film and the gazelle gets away from a lion, okay, it doesn't suddenly have to go to crisis workshops or take antidepressants. It just goes back to grazing. I have a whole thing that these days we're always stressed because we're being bombarded by bad news day and night. You know, the amygdala can't tell if there's something dangerous behind it or something is happening 20,000 miles away. Can't tell the difference. I'm not saying we don't need the news, but suddenly I'm wired because there's an earthquake in dong, dong, dong. You know, like I should know. Or a whale has been beached in Malawi. What can I do? Get an airplane ticket and a tow truck? And then when you get there, I don't know what to do with it. You push it in, you push it out. You roll it over, you milk it, I don't know. But the enemy is this feeling of being overwhelmed, never shuts down. I'm not good enough, I'm not fast enough, I'm not rich enough. And by the way, I don't mean to go off piece, but these things are all invisible. There is something visible now, and none of us are using our fight and flight. The fact that Donald Trump might be the leader of the free world, and what are we doing about it? You know, this is a guy who used to have one nose hair and wind it around his head. Now he's got an albino ferret on his head, and we're just sitting around. The president may end up with roadkill on his head. I'm going off the subject. And people say, is it technology that's driving us nuts? You know, I'm sick of this because we put it there. It didn't drop from Mars. And I thank God every day that at 2 o'clock in the morning, at a click of a finger, I can get a husband. Or a chocolate bee day. And my dream is that someday a drone will be able to come in and shave my legs. So the problem is that it's the speed of it, and we aren't equipped to keep up with that speed. You know, humans always had that go-getter thing. You know, we migrated because we were hungry, you know, so we got up and went to Mongolia, then they ran out of food. You know, we've got this naturally. Then we went to America. Suddenly there was a buffalo buffet, and we just ate till it was extinct. we kept going. The problem is now it's virtual migration. And the thing about humans, again, is to understand we never get satiated. And I think you probably know this, that every day, is this true? That every day we create a quintillion amounts of information, quintillion bytes of information every day. Do you know what that is? It's a 1 with 18 zeros after it. So no wonder we're wired. So I'm not saying shut it off, but we have to learn some way to navigate the noise. Okay, I happen to, I was interested in that because I wasn't just getting wired, but I have depression. So I wanted to figure out, is there some way I don't have to run to shrinks and give them my bank account? Is there some way I could self-regulate? I happen to find out, because of scientific journals, maybe you have your own way, that mindfulness and cognitive-based therapy had the best results. Otherwise, I would have been, if it was tree hugging, I would have taken that up. But you can actually see it in a brain scanner. If you do if you start to practice this, the amygdala shrinks. I don't believe in anything unless I can see it or taste it, because I can't take the fluffy stuff. So because I have an extreme amount of dopamine, well, I've got that go-getter thing, which is good news because you get great jobs, but the bad news is it makes me crash and burn into a wall. So I hunted down one of the founders of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. He was a professor at Oxford. I'm a driven woman, so I said, give me what happens in the brain. I just don't want to believe this, and I don't have time to sit. I don't even have time to take a shower, so sometimes I don't. Don't tell anybody. Nobody has time. I said, so I want to know what happens in the brain. He said, you'd have to get into Oxford and get your master's, and so I did. And I graduated 3 years ago. I wish my mother knew. I'd have to dig her up. Don't say anybody I said that. That was awful. I don't know what's about to come out of my mouth until I hear it. So that's why I became so fascinated. At least it's a braking system. I'm sure there's others. There will be biofeedback, and we'll talk about mindfulness like it's the dark ages. But it's all I know. So would you like to know how it works? Because it's all I know at this point. All right, go with me on this. If you don't want to go with me, get back on your computer, because I know how tempting that is. Really. I know the addiction. Believe me, I'm up at 2 o'clock in the morning. My fingers are having an orgy on those keyboards. It's so hard to shut it off. And people write, Dear Ruby, I'm already on it. And then I hate them because they don't write me back. And then I hate them even more because then I have to answer those fuckers. I even start scraping around to answer spam. So you know what I'm talking about. So the way mindfulness works, I'll do the scientific version because that makes me look smart. Is I pointed out already, we always have the racing mind, always, okay? The racing mind is the fight and flight because we got language now. So where we used to be vigilant for the enemy, now the voices, the thoughts have replaced, oh my God, I'm gonna get caught, oh my God, I'm not good enough. My mother was right, that's a long playing album in my head. So you understand that's the amygdala, so picture it, okay? If you take your focus to one of your senses, you don't have to buy them on Amazon. You know, taste, sound, smell, touch. Immediately, the racing thoughts calm down, okay? You can't have both. Think of it mechanically. So, because there's no words when you feel something. So if you want to should I stand up? If you want to give a taster of this, I know this is a little baby, but just go with me. It's either gabbling or it's a sense. Maybe I'll sit down, it's too scary. All right, so put your hands out, okay? And when I count to 3, clap them really hard, and then just hold them up and try to keep your mind on the sense. If your thinking takes over, that's cool. Take it back to the sense. Just focusing on it. So 1, 2, 3, clap. So you'll notice you're trying to think, is it tingly? Just sense if it is. And which finger is tingling? Or throbbing, or it's warm. So you go thumbs, pointing fingers, 3rd finger, 4th, 5th. And then gradually, you'll notice it fades away. Now this isn't mindfulness, okay? It's just, it's like playing the scales before you play Rachmaninoff. And the point of mindfulness isn't to become a better clapper. It's so that it's the way, the minute you start focusing on any sense, your brain cools down. The amygdala, the cortex, and that's the only way you can watch your thoughts, is if you're cool, which is to do with resilience, because until you can cool your brain down, I don't care how you do it, get that cortisol down, and there's probably Fitbits that'll show you how to do it, though they're in the dark ages too. But the point isn't just to notice, oh, it's gone down, but we need to watch our thoughts, otherwise we're sleepwalking. Because that's when you're creative. You need to be able to focus in on what you're thinking rather than just, because if you're not watching them, you won't notice when they snare you and they get caught in that rumination. So it's as if you're the shrink. Now you watch when they start to go, at least you've got a kind of stopgap, especially if you're, you're trying to, you're getting I get a writer's block, pull it to a focus. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. And I start to get a different relationship with my thoughts. I start to name them rather than be at the mercy of them. So sometimes I go, oh, that's track number 52, which is everybody knows I'm a fraud. Or track number 75, which is they're looking at me, but they're not really listening. Now, this may be true, but at least, the minute you become the watcher, the minute you start watching, actually the cortisol comes down. If you want another scientific version of why that happens, again, if you understand a little bit about the brain, you don't have to become a neurosurgeon, but understand that when you take this focus from the amygdala to the insula, there's no muscles in your brain, but you're building up more gray matter. Just go with me on this, which means more and more neural connections, which is making you resilient. Let's call it the scientific version. Let's just call it gloop. That's my name. So each time you take the focus, that insula is getting more and more just gloop. So when the shit hits the fan, you've got that resilience, or at least my version of it. So it's easier to pull to a sense. You're not going to stay there. But let me just tell you, if you're getting that red mist and you can't think anymore, if you learn to pull it back, you're not vegging out. But when you go back in, just like a car or just like rebooting your computer, you've got more resilience than the next guy. So actually, it's quite good for business. And if you don't understand the gloop, everything you learn is by gray matter. If you are memorizing something, the reason you do it over and over and over again, it's not because you're getting more filing cabinets in your head. It's because that particular area of the memory is building up more and more gloop. That's how you learn the piano. That's how you learn how to do a backhand. And by the way, you have to practice it. Everything you learn, if you think about it, calculus, how to walk, how to talk, how to pole dance, is because you repeat it over and over and over again. It's the practice that does it. So if you want to do a mindfulness exercise now, want to do it? All right, now this is making more gloop. Obviously not just today, but keep it up. All right, so again, this is the exercise. Come away from the back of your chair. You just do this for a minute, okay? So, and by the way, nobody has time to do this, but when you're in a queue, when you're, sitting on the bus, you all have waiting time. When you're walking down a hallway, even a minute of this, becoming aware, builds the gloop. All right, so take your focus to a sense, and let's start with the sense that's as far from your gabbling brain as you can. So take your focus to where your feet, if you can, touch the ground, so you feel the contact of your foot on the ground. Everybody can do that. And you're going to want to think, but that's cool, just take it back to the sense. Okay, let it go. And if you didn't register anything, doesn't matter. Now focus on where your body's making contact with the chair, so you feel the whole outline and the inside your skin, where it's making contact, so you really feel the effects of gravity. Okay, so just let that focus go. And now take your focus to the sense of sound. So all you're doing is listening. and your mind's going to take you. Believe me, in a couple seconds, you're going to get snared by your thoughts. Maybe you're thinking about, I don't know, the future, the past, fantasy, getting angry. As soon as you notice it, you haven't done anything wrong. You just notice it, and then without giving yourself a hard time at all, because everybody's minds do it, take your focus back to listening. And then your thoughts will take you at some point. Again, don't whip yourself about it. Just take it back again. Okay, another sense, if you want, is just let the sound go and take your focus to where you notice that you're breathing, either whatever your area is most vivid, through the tip of your nose, your throat, your chest, your abdomen, and stay with it. Just try to focus on where your air is going in and out. And then your mind's going to take you. You have to do something. You didn't do something. You should do something. Whatever you're thinking, you just go, okay, I noticed it, good. No judgment, go back to where you were breathing. And if you have trouble tracking your breath, see if you can count to 5. This isn't a contest. Just, it's easier to be more specific. So in breath, out breath is 1. In breath, out breath, 2. And if you lose your way, you haven't done anything wrong, just go back to 1. And if you don't get to 5, it's not a contest. So in breath, out breath, 1. Okay, yeah. So another thing this does is it teaches you to pay attention, which goes back to resilience and risk, is that whatever else is the racing mind, is that it really, again, there's a part in your brain, I could tell you the name of it, that is in charge of attention. By the way, I'm making it simplistic, but it really is your anterior cingulate cortex is getting the gloop so that you really learn, you're practicing how to, you don't do it all day, you don't do sit-ups all day. It's just a short amount of time, even a minute, but even that has an effect when they look in a brain scanner. So each time you bring the focus, you're sharpening the ability to pay attention. And people go, well, what's with attention? I pay it, okay? Well, you don't. Actually, as humans, we can only pay attention to something for 1.2 seconds, and then we flit away. Because our minds, believe it or not, are still caveman. It doesn't understand that there's been some redecoration for the 21st century. So really, all we're geared for is to see what's dangerous and what's safe. That's it. We really aren't equipped to pick one toothpaste out of 5,000 choices. So it's either a snake or it's a stick. And what also I think is interesting is wherever you pay attention defines who you are in that second. So if you're sitting in the computer but your mind is, off on a holiday, you're not actually at the computer. Everything in your brain is somewhere else. I know that because I actually experienced it. I was in Melbourne 2 years ago, and the sun was eclipsing, and it happens only once every 200 years. But my brain I'm shouting at the White Company in London because somebody sent me a single duvet instead of the king size. That's where my brain is. I'm thinking, right? The sun is eclipsed. The moon is going in front of the sun. It's going to happen in another 199 years, and I am tearing somebody's neck off because he sent me the wrong duvet. So, and I'm thinking, if I die in the next second, do I want my mind to have been in the White Company? Well, if there's a 20% sale, then I don't mind. Actually, I don't know if I have time. I could talk a little bit about, how much time have I got? Not much.
Yeah.
You want a little bit about neuroplasticity? Is that they used to think our brains were locked in stone. The way you come into the world is how you go out. But now they know it's constantly shape-shifting. Every experience you have, even your genes are affected. We aren't locked. I mean, you're never going to be an Einstein. Well, you probably are Einstein. You're never going to be an Einstein if you don't have the genes, but there's a lot of elbow room. It's constantly moving around. It's like pass the parcel, except it's not some crap gift. It's passing chemicals through electric transmitters. So if you're very tense, it's starting to pass that cortisol. That's how it goes, and then we freeze. That's what happens. And we go into that other thing beside fight and flight. We freeze. And this is where you get people who start to, because we hate uncertainty. That really is the natural condition. And when we feel it, we actually, our version of freezing is we start to stick to stereotypes. Like people will say, oh, I'm a victim, which you aren't. I mean, we're everything. But it's better the devil you know. They've actually put scanners on people's eyes. If we had 0, man, we didn't have time for question and answer. And they will always look for the perpetrator. So basically, if those neurons, if you start to learn how to cool your engine, if you really start to be able to self-regulate your chemicals, then you can really navigate around the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. By literally, the only way to do it is coming to your senses. So I'm kind of done, but we don't have time for question and answer.
No, I think we... Sasha, I think we do. Right? Yeah.
How much?
Yeah.
20? Oh, well, then I could go on. No, I won't go on.
Go on.
I won't go on.
Do you want to ask questions? I mean, ask questions on anything we've said, and then also maybe, as we said earlier, sort of bringing it back together around this theme of, you know, how can we harness technology to solve mental well-being, whether hardware or software?
Yeah. Oh, I think you have to get up there, but I think we can hear you.
Yeah. So,
Can you hear him?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good. So in your opinion, how does like subconscious fit into this context? And how do you view subconscious? So I'm saying again.
How do you view the subconscious? You mean in a Freudian sense?
Yes. So like, do you think there's a subconscious? There's something else that even if we think about it, but when we go to sleep, there's something else that's going on
Yeah.
beyond our control.
Well, I think you can, I think it's a little bit old-fashioned that we have to analyze it. It's a little bit like, looking at what your body produces and trying to figure out the source of it. If you start to delve into what it is, sorry for any Freudian, you're actually embedding it more and more, and then you do come up, I'm an alcoholic, I'm this, you get a story, but memory doesn't work like that. Memory works like photocopies. So eventually, why hold on to that? So the thing about mindfulness is that you're allowing the thoughts to come and go. I suppose that's your unconscious, it's pornographic, it's adorable, it's cruel. You're starting to get a distance, and again, if you let it go, you start to notice it's never going to shut off, even before you go to sleep. People think the point of mindfulness is that you go blank. Okay, your mind is blank when you're dead. That's a big clue that you're dead. You're blank. So you're actually, and it's a misconception, you're allowing this hell, and it's always awful. Always, I get up in the morning, and believe me, it's Armageddon. But gradually, you sort of learn it's a radio in another room. Like right now, if I shut up, boy, would I be getting hell. Intimidation isn't in it. But eventually, you learn to live with it. You go, oh yeah, come on in, fine. And when you get that relationship, actually, if you get the distance, the minute that cortisol's down, resilience, risk, everything takes place because nobody's frightening you anymore. The only thing that's frightening are our thoughts. Nobody can hurt you. It's your thoughts that can really put you in a bad place.
Just to add to that, I think the Daniel Kahneman behavioral economics stuff, which explicitly recognized the role of subconscious, system one in our economic behavior, is some of the most powerful insights in economics over the last couple of decades. Daniel Kahneman.
Thinking Fast and Slow.
Thinking Fast and Slow. Any others? Okay.
I had a quick question about sleep.
Can you come closer?
Yeah, can you hear me now? I had a question about sleep and whether you could chat a little bit on how, since obtaining your degree, you've been able to apply your new knowledge to becoming a better sleeper, assuming that you weren't a brilliant one before.
Yeah.
And any practical advice for the insomniacs in the crowd?
Well, first of all, listen to Russell Foster on TED Talks, because he's the expert of experts. And far worse than any within limit drugs. If you don't sleep enough, that cortisol will crash you to the ground. And by the way, people go, oh yeah, I'm a little stressed. Yeah, I can deal with it. I can take it on. You can't take it on. If it keeps going, it won't just lead to insomnia. Every disease is caused by that. Diabetes, cancer, obesity, drug addiction, mental illness, infertility. So I'm just saying, be scared. Stay up a little later. I think that, again, if you do something like mindfulness, and if you don't want to do, by the way, it isn't for everybody, it becomes a habit. And they teach kids now, it's something called meditation. If you really practice this thing, and if it doesn't work, find something that does. I don't care if you take Xanax once in a while, or I've learned, mindfulness means you learn what it is that works for you. Don't imitate the next guy who sleeps 3 hours. Most of us really need it. Maybe you can't take the time, but this is another thing about understanding, no matter what job you have, if you're tired, you'll notice you can't be creative. So if you practice this, don't just pull the ripcord when you can't go to sleep or when I know I'm getting depressed. If you just do it once, it's like you can't do one sit-up. But if you keep practicing, there is a way, again, of lowering. The racing thoughts won't happen, but the reason you go to sleep is they continue. You know that thing. And gradually you go from alpha to theta. I mean, it will happen, but you can't just do it once, even if you grab a minute a day. But if it doesn't work for you, experiment. Again, try everything.
There's actually an interesting parallel. So to what Rumi was describing earlier, when she went to Oxford, she learned, excuse me, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, so a branch of CBT from Professor Mark Williams. Another professor at Oxford, Colin Espy, actually has a company called Sleepio, in which I'm an investor. So I'm not objective on this, but it is delivering sleep-based CBT digitally, and then actually a whole bunch of other stuff. So it's actually a similar branch. It all starts in cognitive behavioral therapy.
See, technology is going to rule.
So it's in a way a perfect example. Yeah.
And the results are unbelievable.
It's very powerful. So. Oh, brilliant. For those of you who didn't hear, all Googlers have access to the Sleepio thing, which is great.
I was going to ask a question.
Yeah.
You said a few times that we're in like Stone Age as far as sort of mental health and mindfulness is concerned. What do you see or hope the future is with mindfulness and mental health?
Oh, you want to go first?
Yeah. So I think this is the stuff, and actually this is a question that we would like to ask you, which is, how do we harness technology to help us solve mental well-being, as we said earlier? And we've talked about it a bit before. There are two flavors of this. One is, if you like, a hardware flavor. Is there a Fitbit for the mind? And what does that look like? Where does it sit? Does it sit on your wrist? And that would be something probably that can measure heart rate variability very accurately, because that's the best proxy for the amount of cortisol in the system. Come back to that. And then the second is, when Ruby mentioned it earlier, when she was talking about track 17 and is there software, machine learning software, that can help me objectively recognize those soundtracks, maybe before I'm recognizing them, or maybe before I'm allowing myself to believe, oh gosh, yeah, it is that soundtrack again. So again, that feels to me more like is there a software solution, an AI-based software solution that can recognize those soundtracks before I do? So those are the two. I don't know. If we go back to the first, if if I can take your question and make it another question, is, has anybody seen anything like that? A piece of hardware that is going to be, able to accurately measure heart rate variability, for example. Anybody seen that?
Is that your area, by the way, at all? Of looking at the hardware that would maybe say, see what I mean, it's the wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Probably less so, actually, right? That's.
I think
other
it's an
bits of Google
engineer
do.
thing.
Yeah.
What do you think? Yeah,
Yeah, probably.
we're wasting our breath.
And then the software side, the AI side, is that, again, does that sort of resonate with you? Something that enables you to recognize those patterns in your own mind, maybe even before you do?
To me, the problem with all this is I understand you can check how quick you're running, though to me that, or how many steps you do, but to me that leads to a nervous breakdown. Oh my God, I didn't do my 2,000. So it raises up the cortisol even more, though you may have run, whatever. But what we're missing here, and I think what it should incorporate, is the practice isn't just to notice the cortisol, the practice is to give you insight. And also, I mean, it's infinite to help you get into the present, though that sounds slushy, but if you think it does, ask yourself how much money you spend to get there. If you go to a restaurant and go to buy that wine that's from the Valley. Okay, if you don't taste it, you might as well cut out the middleman and pour it into the toilet. Somebody said, if you can ask somebody what's the best time in their lives and they say now, then they've arrived. So the main thing is to recognize who you are. I mean, that was always know thyself, and it still stands. If when you're in the midst of a situation, okay, you don't recognize what's going on in your head, it'll happen over and over again. The practice is to understand. Sometimes I know I'm cooking on gas because I write for AbFab, and I'm crashing. If you think getting brain freeze is bad, if you're trying to be funny, the first thing that goes with a little bit of stress, forget about it. You can't, because the whole thing is about getting out of the box. But sometimes I use mindfulness. I let the bullshit go by, the crap, how awful I am, how I've never written a funny line, who do I think I am? And gradually, it's like something rises out of the mud. They say your most inspiration comes from when you're taking a shower. Get in the shower, I suppose, but you might be at work. It ain't going to happen. Oh, no, you have showers here. But out of the mud suddenly comes the most creative thing. The heart's down, the risk thing is cooking, and out of that dirt suddenly rises up. So you can use it for creative thought. So just to use it to get down, to get that alpha state, that's not what we're aiming for. When you run, it doesn't matter. You can run mindlessly. And by the way, to me, that's not the answer. You can run mindfully, but you have to read my book to do that. I'm not pushing it, but I'm pimping it. But you can use it for various things. So basically, I think what we were talking about is that even with this new hardware, somebody has to be very careful because again, we'll be chasing the wrong rabbit. The point of this is to understand yourself. When you're sitting there and you can't burn out anymore, you can't take anymore, look where your tipping point is. What are you thinking? Otherwise, you'll never learn where your tipping point is. There's a moment where, that, it starts to curve down and then learn to go, that'll help you go to sleep. If you keep acknowledging your tipping point, I'm sure you won't get fired because once you recognize it, you take a rest. This should be in the hardware. Your computer starts to say, it doesn't say, but it starts to slow down and it's replaced by, I don't care if it's your cat purring. I've actually recorded my cat, but there's a moment, you know what I mean, a sound or a smell work for you. But I think that's the future. Though, run with that idea. I listen to jungle noises, I swear to God. It cools me right down, but don't do it while you're driving.
Advertising tries to get people's attention, right? So it tries to take you from what you're doing, what you're thinking about, and draw your attention to whatever the objective of the advertiser is. a lot of us work in advertising. What do you think about the effects of advertising on mindfulness? And what is the responsibility of companies like Google, Facebook, towards advocating mindfulness?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So, who's the Nobel economist who talks about the attention economy? Now I've totally forgotten. I always find that an incredibly helpful way to, start thinking about this, because that is advertising's job, is to grab my attention. And the way I've thought about it for myself is actually, if you put yourself through digital detox, which I don't know if, has anybody tried that, by the way, just as an exercise with yourself? Yeah, sort of 10% of the room.
What kind of a risk was that, boy? Yeah. I would think that's the highest risk of all.
Right. It's so when you do that and you actually deliberately starve yourself of those attention distractions from advertising, then you realize, and for me it was only then that I realized what a great job you guys do of, distracting me most of the time. Right.
Ooh, was that a backhander?
No, it's entirely a compliment. But so that for me was the recognition that I am much more distracted by this, that you have done a great job of drawing my attention, and so in order to fight that, for me I need to unplug, which I don't do a great job of, but I'm at least conscious of it and try to do it from time to time. That answer it a little bit.
Yeah, great. And what is our responsibility as?
Well, so I was going to say, raising kids or being with your friends or your relationships at work is you have to walk the talk, because we work like neural Wi-Fi. So if I can cool myself down, it has a kind of ripple effect. So I think if you understood what it is to not be distracted and not get nervous that it's job's worth, I think you might start thinking out of the box. Because part of the thing that distraction does is it might not even buy your product or whatever, is it makes people nervous, which means they're not thinking clearly. So they really won't focus on what it is you're trying to get over, you're trying to get across. And believe me, if you think if you're distracted, it will reflect in what you're trying to push. I've done things last week for call centers, and I said, don't assume what worked in the past is going to work now, because people can sense it even over the thing. They can sense that you're doing a quick fix, but they can also I'm doing it more person to person, is that when you're really interested in that person, if you're curious, that's the key to their heart. So I don't know how you do it, but it's almost like, how we start by asking questions and sort of letting them figure it out. It's your humanity and it's your curiosity that if you're really curious and you're trying to get in and you're really learning to pay attention, then they'll give you the keys to their car, their wife, their money. I don't know how you do that digitally, but I think if you practice something where your life isn't a series of distractions and you really learn to listen, it might, maybe you'll have group meetings, inspire you to do something where you really hook somebody. I don't know what that is because it's not my job, but it has to start with you.
And we all know what that feels like, right? When we're in a, my wife is one of those people who, if you ask my children or any of our friends, she is one of those people who, when she's present in a conversation, she's incredibly present. And she doesn't practice mindfulness to get there.
Yeah, she's a natural.
She's a natural, yeah, you know it. She's a natural. Some people can do that. So it is it's very precious. Yeah.
Maybe you ask people what they want, and then you sculpt what you're giving.
Thank you.
Hi. I've been practicing for about, I think, a year and a half, almost every day. And something that I find is, even though I think in the long term it's been very beneficial, I sometimes struggle with increased anxiety as a result of this increased sense of being present, right? Because sometimes you're so present that when you run into these cycles of anxiety, it just sort of perpetrates into more and more and more. How do you deal with that? Because it's something that I've, like I said, found very useful over the course of time, but then sometimes it is very, you're almost too present.
Yeah, I got that. But again, mindfulness means that you're taking the temperature, you're the barometer. If it's too much, you know, I always say, if you're in the midst of burnout or if you're in depression, do not go near this. Mindfulness is the big thing in bold print is be nice to yourself. Go in the gym, maybe you can't because you broke your arm, but go in the gym, distract yourself. There's moments where you need distractions, just like there's moments when you need stress. But again, you know, you don't want it to be like you listen to lovely music or there's nothing. I meditate, go on the tube, because you learn to tolerate. And to tolerate is the way kids will survive, or, you know, it's a muscle. But, you know, again, you'll see your tipping point. When it's driving you nuts, get up. You know?
Yeah, fair enough. And I think a follow-up question, you were saying before about how you gauge kind of co-founders in terms of their resilience and their ability to manage stress. Who else do you see doing that? Like, in terms, is that something you'd say is somewhat widespread amongst funds and people trying to invest in startups? Gauging, you know, the ability of founders to be resilient, to take on leadership through kind of stress management, etc.
Yeah, I think everybody. I mean, I think everybody who does what I do will do their own version of that, because it's kind of sort of obvious, isn't it?
Yeah.
That again, if in my world, it's not so much that we cherish the idea, it's that we cherish the ability to get something done. And so, how do people get something done even when the doors all seem to be closed? Well, then you want to back, you know, founders who will climb through the window if the door's closed. On your earlier point, I was going to say that there is a temptation for meditation. Well, a couple of points. One is that meditation, like yoga, can sometimes start to become competitive in some random way, right?
Yeah.
You know, how long do you do it for? You know, all this kind of stuff, which is, generally less helpful. And a slightly more philosophical point here, which is sort of that I think everybody I know who has been meditating, practicing mindfulness for a long time, comes to a point where, and I think a lot of Mark Williams and others did an amazing job of helping bring it into the scientific realm bring it into the scientific realm and you know, wrap it in neuroscience. But Mark and others will also tell you that there comes a point where actually it's helpful if it's slightly pushed back into an ethical realm, so that you're not just doing it because it's great for, you know, to shrink your amygdala. That you know, in addition, that it is somehow helping you think about what's good, and that it has some kind of ethical vector through it as well as just pure kind of the ability to focus your attention on the present moment. See what I mean?
I think that's from, I know I put it in small brackets, but when you notice that your mind is flipping, it's part of the habit breaking is being nice to yourself, kind, or whatever, or compassionate. It's, again, I always think of a horrible greeting card, but that's the training, so that when you start to recognize that how cruel you are to yourself, part of it is to understand when somebody else is giving you hell, they're listening to a recording too, so you stop taking it so personally. So again, the point isn't to sit on a gluten-free cushion. The point is that you're now recognizing yourself and other people, or that we're all in the same situation. That's, again, not in the small print, but I always have trouble with the C word, which is compassion.
Great answer, thank you.
That's a side. That's a side.
I have a slightly
Got
follow-on question. So can you talk us through an example or give advice or maybe tell a story of when this has happened, that you get to that tipping point, you're frazzled, you're overwhelmed, but there's still the issue that it's not fully socially acceptable sometimes, or it is acceptable, you don't feel it is, to put your hand up and say, I've got too much on my plate, I can't cope. And we still, obviously, we work in a very accepting place, but there's still commitments to be had, there's still meetings to show up to, you still have to turn up to work tomorrow, even though sometimes you don't feel like you can, and that bit is sometimes hard to break through.
She wrote a book about this, too, in fact.
I know you can't. I can't stop either. But let's say I'm doing a show. Okay, I'm doing a show, so I grab a minute backstage, or you'll grab a minute. I don't care. There is a minute, especially if you're going to have a meeting or something. I'm not saying stop what you're doing. As a matter of fact, there's now books that show you how to be present while you're doing your work, which is noticing it's always noticing the state of mind and going back to maybe looking at what you're doing. But the exercise is, where is your mind? Bring it back. Where is your mind? Bring it back. And as far as work, when you do go into a meeting and it's getting tense, if you recognize when it's getting, when you're locking antlers and this meeting isn't going anywhere, I wish they would really learn to hold up a white flag and say, we're just caught in that, animal cycle. I think, again, if you learn while you're there, and because you practice, to cool it down, I'm sure that's why Arabs use those beads, because it's splitting their attention. If you learn to do it in this situation, walking, being in the gym, eating can be a time to do the exercise. So you don't have to take time off. Just that 1 minute, I think you can see the results. If somebody does it 3.5 hours, it already shows. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
It's a very hard thing to do, isn't it? To sort of put your hand up and say, I'm
You don't
frazzled.
have to put your hand up,
Right.
though. It's a personal thing. You don't have to admit to anybody. Hopefully you're avoiding burnout by doing this kind of thing. And again, for technology, I know there shouldn't be a buzzer because it'll get people into competing going, I shut off first. But again, if it could be replaced by whatever it is that cools you down, because you need a reminder. That's the thing. When we get frazzled, how do you pull out? I think it's practice.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our hour now, but Ruby and Peter, thank you so much for coming today and talking to us.
Thank you.